"Don't get in the car," says the cleaning lady's daughter to the billionaire. What happens next is unbelievable. Richard Sterling adjusted the cuffs of his Italian shirt as he walked through the underground parking garage. His leather shoes echoed on the polished concrete with a confident and determined rhythm. It was Thursday, 6:30 p.m., and another profitable day was coming to an end. The morning's negotiations had yielded $2 million in contracts, and the afternoon meeting had nearly doubled that amount. The parking garage was his private territory, 20 spaces reserved exclusively for him and his VIP guests. No ordinary employee dared to set foot there. The security cameras captured every movement, and the guards knew exactly who was allowed in that area. It was a sanctuary of power and status. The Lamborghini Aventador gleamed under the LED lights like a precious jewel. Matte black, chrome wheels, a V12 engine that roared like a wild beast. Richard smiled with satisfaction. It was more than a car. It was a statement of superiority. It cost $500,000, but it was worth every penny for the impact it had on people. He pulled the key from his pocket, savoring the weight of the cold metal. The day had been perfect in every way. 3 new investors had confirmed their participation in the South Korea project, and his Japanese rival had finally given up the competition. Everything was going according to plan, as always. Richard approached the driver's door with calculated steps. His reflection appeared in the dark glass, impeccable graying hair, a $5,000 suit without a single wrinkle, the upright posture of someone who dominates the world. At 52, he still maintained the imposing presence that had built his fortune. The key fit into the lock with a soft click. "I don't get in the car." The shout echoed through the parking garage like an emergency siren. Richard froze, his hand still on the key. The voice was high-pitched, desperate, filled with panic. A child. "They cut the brakes." Richard spun around abruptly, irritation etched on his face. On the other side of the garage, near the restricted service entrance, a little blonde girl was running towards him. She couldn't have been more than 5 years old, golden hair flying loose, wide, terrified light blue eyes, small legs moving as fast as they could. "What the hell is going on here?" Richard muttered to himself. The girl arrived breathless, her rosy cheeks red from the effort. Her simple clothes were a bit rumpled, and she held a folded piece of paper in her small hand. "You can't get in the car," she repeated between gasps, desperately pulling at the hem of his suit. "They cut the brakes. I saw them doing something bad." Richard looked at her with complete irritation and disgust. A dirty, unknown child touching his $5,000 Italian suit. This was unacceptable. He pushed her small hand away with a sharp, impatient movement. "Little girl, get out of here immediately," he said with icy harshness, as if speaking to an unwanted insect. "This is a private and restricted area. You shouldn't be here at all." "But they cut the brakes on your car," she insisted, pointing a trembling finger at the Lamborghini. "I saw a man doing something dangerous underneath." "What kind of absurd nonsense is this?" Richard scoffed with disdain, rolling his eyes impatiently. "Who would cut the brakes on my car? You're making up ridiculous stories." "Children always invent crazy fantasies." Mia's blue eyes filled with glistening tears. Her lower lip trembled, but she tried one more time. "I saw a man," she tried to explain, her voice coming out soft and frightened. "Enough of this nonsense." Richard raised his voice with authority, making it echo in the empty garage. "Say go find your mother immediately and stop bothering me with these ridiculous childish fantasies. I have important things to do." The girl took a step back, visibly frightened by his harsh tone. Her lips trembled even more, but she didn't run away as Richard had expected. Instead, she stood there watching him with those large, desperate eyes. "Kai, please," she whispered almost inaudibly. "Don't get in the car. Something bad is going to happen." "This is completely ridiculous," he grumbled irritably, turning back to the Lamborghini's door. But something in the child's desperate and sincere expression made him hesitate for a second. Perhaps it was the intensity of those blue eyes, or the genuine desperation in her voice. Richard took out his phone and dialed security, more annoyed than genuinely concerned. "James, Richard Sterling speaking." There's a lost child in my private parking garage causing a disturbance, and I want someone to take a quick look at my car, too. Mr. Sterling? James's voice sounded confused on the other end. Is there a specific problem with the vehicle? Probably not. But this annoying girl is insisting on a completely crazy story about cut brakes. Just to be absolutely sure and get rid of this headache, send someone to check it quickly. On my way, sir. 2 minutes. Richard put his phone away with an exasperated sigh. The girl was still there, a few feet away, watching him with those huge, scared eyes. He ignored her completely, as if she were invisible. James appeared, running down the emergency stairs, followed by 2 uniformed guards. His face was red with worry and utter confusion. Mr. Sterling, I swear I don't know how she managed to get past all the security. We'll discuss this glaring security failure later, Richard cut in coldly. Right now, I want you to look under my car, immediately. Sir? James hesitated, clearly confused. You heard me perfectly. Look under the car and check if everything is normal. James exchanged perplexed glances with the other guards, but obeyed without question. He knelt on the cold floor and slid under the gleaming Lamborghini. Richard crossed his arms impatiently, annoyed by the whole absurd situation and waste of time. A child invading his privacy, crazy stories about sabotage, incompetent guards. Mr. Sterling? James's voice came out muffled from under the car, with a strange tone. Well, can I go home or not? James crawled out slowly, his face completely pale. In his grease-stained hands, he held 2 cables that had been cut with surgical precision. The brakes, sir, he stammered. The cables are cut, cleanly cut, with a professional tool. The entire world stopped spinning. Richard felt the blood run cold in his veins. He looked at the cables in James's hands, then at the Lamborghini. Then he mentally traced the road that would lead to his mansion, 10 miles of winding and dangerous mountain curves. Are you absolutely sure? His voice came out lower and more tremulous than usual. Absolutely sure, sir. A clean, precise cut. Professional work. Richard felt his legs go weak and the world spin. If he had gotten into the car as usual, if he had driven off confidently as he always did, the first sharp curve would have been his end. Certain death. For a brief moment, his eyes automatically searched for the girl. She had completely disappeared. James or one of the guards had probably sent her away during the check. James stood up slowly, wiping the oil from his hands. Sir, I need to call the police immediately. This is a clear attempt of murder. Richard nodded slowly, but his mind was completely elsewhere. An unknown 5-year-old child had just saved his life. If she hadn't screamed desperately, if she hadn't insisted despite his rudeness. Yes, he murmured absently. Call the police and the forensics team. James was already dialing his phone. The other guards were meticulously checking the entire garage, looking for cameras, clues, any evidence that could explain how someone managed to sabotage the most monitored and protected car in the city. Richard leaned against the cold concrete wall. His hands were shaking violently, something that hadn't happened in decades. Since building his first $1 million, he had never felt vulnerable or threatened. Money had always bought complete security. Power had always bought absolute protection, or at least that's what he had always blindly believed. But there he was, alive only because an unknown little blonde girl decided to break all the rules and enter a forbidden parking garage to warn him of a mortal danger that not even his multi-million-dollar security systems could detect. Mr. Sterling, James approached cautiously. The police will be here in 5 minutes. Richard nodded mechanically, but he couldn't stop thinking about the brave child who had vanished as quickly as she had appeared. He didn't even know her name. For the first time in a long time, he felt something he had completely forgotten, real fear. And a strange, uncomfortable feeling that he owed his life to a child whose name he didn't even know and whom he had treated with total contempt. Richard Sterling sat in his German leather executive chair, but his mind was miles away. The panoramic office on the 40th floor offered a spectacular view of the city, yet he couldn't see a thing. His eyes, fixed on the glass wall, didn't register the buildings below. It was 9:30 a.m. on Friday. 12 hours had passed since the incident in the parking garage. 12 hours since he discovered that someone had tried to kill him. The mahogany desk was covered with urgent financial reports. Contracts awaited his signature. 3 important meetings were scheduled for that day. But Richard couldn't concentrate on anything at all. His hands still trembled when he picked up the pen. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the same scene, him getting into the Lamborghini, driving down the winding road, trying to brake at the first curve, and the pedals going straight to the floor. Who would do such a thing? This question hammered in his mind without stopping. Richard Sterling had built his empire by stepping on many people. He knew that. You didn't get to the top by being kind. Over the years, he had fired hundreds of employees, bankrupted dozens of smaller companies, and destroyed competitors. But trying to murder him, that was a whole other level. He stood up and walked to the window. Down below, people looked like ants, each with their own problems, their ambitions, their motives. How many of them could want to see him dead? Richard thought about his partners in the company. There were tensions, of course. Marcus, his vice president, was annoyed with some recent decisions. But Marcus had been his friend for 15 years. It would be impossible. Or would it? His secretary, Mrs. Patterson, entered with a tray. "I brought you some chamomile tea, Mr. Sterling. You seem tense." "Thank you," he murmured, without turning around. "The police called. Detective Morrison wants to speak with you today." Richard nodded. The investigation was starting. Forensics, fingerprints, analysis of the cameras. All very technical. But what if they never found out who it was? "Mrs. Patterson," he said, still looking out the window. "Yesterday there was a child in the parking garage, a small blonde girl. Do you know where she came from?" Mrs. Patterson frowned. "A child in the private garage. That's strange." "Well, there was. I want to know who she is. I'll check with security, sir." When Mrs. Patterson left, Richard returned to his chair. But the image of the girl wouldn't leave his mind. Huge blue eyes, golden hair, that desperate expression when he had treated her so rudely. Why was she so concerned about a stranger? Children usually didn't care about unknown adults. But that girl, there was something different about her. The way she insisted, even after he had been rude, the determination in her small voice. Richard picked up the phone and dialed James, the head of security. "James, I need you to find out everything about the child from yesterday." "I'm already on it, Mr. Sterling." "She got in through the service access when one of the cleaning staff was working. It seems she's the daughter of an employee." "Which employee?" "I'm still checking. The night shift has a lot of turnover, but I will find out." Richard hung up and stared at the phone. A cleaning lady's daughter. That explained why she was in the building. But it didn't explain why she risked herself to warn him. The morning passed slowly. Richard tried to read some contracts, but the words danced on the page. His mind kept returning to the same points. Who wanted him dead, and why an unknown child had saved his life. Lunch arrived, and he didn't even touch the food. Mrs. Patterson came in again, concerned. "Mr. Sterling, you need to eat. And the 2 o'clock meeting, cancel it." "But sir, it's the Korean investors." "I said cancel it." Mrs. Patterson sighed and left. Richard knew he was being unfair, but he couldn't bring himself to care. Everything seemed trivial after what had happened. He poured himself a whiskey even though it was noon. The drink burned his throat but brought no relief. Who could have access to the parking garage? That was the central question. The place was more secure than a bank. Cameras, sensors, 24-hour guards. Only a few people had access, himself, some executives, authorized maintenance staff, someone from the inside. This conclusion made him even more restless. It meant the traitor was close, maybe even worked directly with him. Someone he trusted. The phone rang. It was Detective Morrison. "Mr. Sterling, we found some fingerprints on the brake system. We're checking them against the database. How long will it take?" "A few hours. We also want to talk to everyone who had access to the garage in the last 48 hours. After the call, Richard felt a little more hopeful. Maybe the investigation would move quickly. But what about the girl? That question continued to bother him. He couldn't understand why he cared so much about her. She was just a kid who was in the wrong place at the right time. Richard tried to remember exactly what she had said. Something about seeing a man under the car. She had witnessed the sabotage. That meant she could identify the culprit. A shiver ran down his spine. If the saboteur found out there was a witness... He picked up the phone again and called James. "James, I need you to find that girl." "Today?" "Sir." "She may have seen who sabotaged the car. If the culprit finds that out, I understand. I'll speed up the investigation." Richard hung up and started pacing the office again. Now there was a new reason to find the girl. She could be in danger. The afternoon passed in a haze of anxiety. Every noise in the hallway made him look at the door. "Mrs." Patterson asked once more if he was all right, and this time Richard didn't answer. At 5 o'clock, James called. "Mr. Sterling, I found out who the girl is. Her name is Mia. Her mother has been working on the night cleaning crew for 3 months. Deborah Davis. Where are they now?" "The mother is at work. The girl, we don't know. It seems she sometimes stays in the building while her mother works." Richard looked out the window. The sun was beginning to set. In a few hours, it would be night again. The cleaning shift would begin. Mia would be in the building. For the first time all day, Richard felt something like relief. He could find her, talk to her, find out exactly what she had seen, and also make sure she was safe. But as he looked at his reflection in the window, Richard realized something disturbing. It wasn't just about the investigation or the girl's safety. There was something more. He wanted to see her again. The image of those worried blue eyes, of that small voice begging him not to get in the car, was seared into his mind. Mixed with the mystery of who wanted to kill him, she had become a silent obsession. Richard Sterling, the man who controlled millions of dollars, couldn't stop thinking about a 5-year-old girl whose name he had just learned. Mia. The name echoed in his mind as the evening shadows began to take over the city. Deborah Davis looked at the clock on the wall of the small break room. It was 7:15 p.m., and she needed to start her cleaning shift. The problem was Mia. The babysitter had cancelled at the last minute, claiming to be sick. Deborah had no one else to call. Her mother lived in another state, and she didn't know her neighbors well enough to ask for that kind of favor. Working was a necessity, not a choice. She couldn't afford to miss a day. "Mia, come here," she called to her daughter, who was playing with a rag doll in the corner of the room. The little blonde girl ran to her, her light blue eyes shining with curiosity. "Are we going home, Mommy?" "No, sweetie. Mommy has to work tonight. You're going to stay in the lobby while I clean the offices, okay?" Mia nodded without complaining. She was used to these situations. Deborah worked 3 different jobs to support them both, and sometimes you had to improvise, but you have to stay sitting on the big sofa without leaving. You can draw, but you can't wander through the hallways. "Promise?" "I promise, Mommy," Mia said, raising her right hand as if taking a solemn oath. Deborah smiled despite her worry. Her daughter could always get a smile out of her, even in the toughest moments. "If anyone asks you anything, you tell them you're waiting for Mommy, okay? And if someone important shows up, you stay very quiet." "Okay, Mommy." They went up the service elevator to the ground floor. The lobby of the Sterling Corporation was immense, with imported leather sofas, huge plants, and a modern decor that always intimidated Deborah. The marble floor gleamed under the indirect lighting, and the art on the walls probably cost more than her house. "Sit here, my love," she said, pointing to a sofa tucked away in the corner. "Mommy will be back in 2 hours, tops." Mia settled onto the giant sofa, which made her look even smaller. Her little legs didn't even come close to the floor. Deborah handed her some crumpled papers and colored pencils that she always carried in her purse for emergencies like this. "If anyone asks you anything, you say you're waiting for Mommy, okay?" "But yesterday I talked to that man in the parking garage," Mia said innocently. Deborah frowned. "What man? She didn't know anything about that." "Well, what man, sweetie?" "A man in a suit. He almost got into a dangerous car, but I warned him." Deborah felt a chill. Her daughter had spoken to a stranger without her knowing, but before she could ask for more details, The cleaning supervisor appeared in the hallway, waving impatiently. "We'll talk about this later, okay?" she said, kissing her daughter's forehead. "So stay quiet here." Deborah headed for the service elevator, but the worry hammered in her head. She would start on the 35th floor and work her way down, cleaning all the offices. Hopefully, no one would pass through the lobby at this hour. Mia was left alone in the silent lobby. The lights were dimmed for the night, creating long shadows among the elegant furniture. She wasn't afraid. She was used to being alone and always found ways to entertain herself. She picked up a crumpled piece of paper and began to draw a house with a garden. It was always the same thing she drew, a big house with colorful flowers out front and two figures at the door, her and her mom. Sometimes she drew a dog too, although they had never had one. The familiar sound of the elevator made her look up. A man in a dark suit stepped out, walking with firm steps across the polished marble. Mia recognized him immediately. It was the man from the parking garage, the one who almost got into the car with the cut brakes. Richard Sterling was crossing the lobby on his way out when he noticed a small figure on the corner sofa. He stopped abruptly. It was her, the little blonde girl who had warned him the night before. He hesitated for a moment. His first reaction was to keep walking and ignore her, as he did with all low-level employees. But something made him change direction. Richard approached slowly, his shoes echoing on the marble. Mia looked up from her drawing and watched him with curiosity, without fear. "What's your name?" he asked, stopping a few feet away. "Mia," she answered simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world to talk to the owner of the company. Richard was surprised by her naturalness. Most people got nervous in his presence. Experienced executives stammered in meetings. Employees trembled when he walked down the halls. But this little girl looked him straight in the eye, unintimidated. "What are you doing here, Mia?" "Drawing. My mom is working," she replied, going back to coloring a pink flower on the paper. She held up the drawing to show him. It was a simple drawing of a house, made with worn-colored pencils. Nothing elaborate, but there was something touching in its simplicity. "It's beautiful," Richard said, and realized he meant it. Mia smiled, a genuine smile that lit up her whole face and made her blue eyes sparkle. "I want to see the others." Before Richard could answer, she was already spreading other drawings on the sofa, all similar. Houses with gardens, colorful flowers, two figures holding hands at the door. "Do you always draw the same thing?" "It's the house I want to have one day. With a big garden and a swing hanging from a tree," she explained, pointing to a circle that was supposed to represent a swing. The honesty of her answer caught him off guard. When was the last time someone had spoken to him so directly? "It's a beautiful dream," he said. "My mum says if we work really hard, we'll get it one day." She works in 3 different places. Richard felt a strange tightness in his chest. 3 jobs. He couldn't imagine what it was like to have to work so hard just to survive. "Are you hungry?" he asked without thinking. Mia nodded. "A little. But it's okay, I'll eat when I get home." "Come with me." Richard didn't know why he was doing this. It wasn't in his nature to worry about unknown children, but something about this girl intrigued him deeply. They went to the building's cafeteria. It was closed to the public, but Richard had keys to everything. He turned on some lights and opened the refrigerator. "What do you like to eat?" "Anything," Mia replied, sitting at a table that was too big for her. My mum says we shouldn't be picky with food." Richard made 2 ham and cheese sandwiches and poured milk for her and coffee for himself. He sat at the table, something he hadn't done in years. He always ate alone in his office or at expensive restaurants. "Do you work here?" Mia asked, biting into the sandwich with appetite. "Yes, I take care of the company, son," he answered, finding the simplification odd. "It must be nice to work in such a big building. It has an elevator, air conditioning. In the building where we live, the elevator is always broken." "Sometimes it's nice," he admitted. "My mum cleans the offices. She says they're very pretty and organized. She always leaves everything sparkling." Richard nodded, not knowing what to say. He had never thought about the perspective of the people who cleaned his offices. "And you? What do you like to do besides drawing?" "Play at the park. There's one near my house with a slide." But we don't go much because Mom works a lot, and I can't go by myself. Why not? My mum says there are bad people in the world, and kids can't walk around alone. The simplicity of her answers was refreshing. Mia asked for nothing, didn't complain, just answered with an honesty he didn't find in the business world. How old are you? 5. I'm turning 6 next month. And what do you want for your birthday? Mia thought for a moment. A new coloring book. Mine is almost all colored in, and some of the pencils are really tiny now. Richard felt a tightness in his chest. A 5-year-old child asking for just a coloring book for her birthday. He spent more on lunch than 1,000 of those books would cost. So do you go to school? Not yet. But my mom is trying to enroll me in a good one. She says she needs to save money first. For what? Uniform, school supplies, lunch. Mia counted on her little fingers. My mom makes a list of everything and saves money in a little tin can. Richard fell silent. He didn't know money was needed for such basic things. The conversation continued for a few more minutes. Mia talked about her drawings, about the rag doll her mom had given her, about the orange cat that sometimes appeared on their apartment window. The cat must have an owner, but he sits on the windowsill looking in. I named him Marmalade. You can't have a cat. The building manager doesn't allow pets. And my mum says pets need a vet, and that costs money. Richard found himself genuinely smiling. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't thinking about money, contracts, or company problems. I have to go, Mia said, finishing her milk. My mom should be back soon. Of course. They walked back to the lobby. Mia sat on the sofa and picked up her colored pencils again. Thank you for the snack, she said, with a politeness she had clearly learned from her mother. You're welcome, Mia. Richard stood there for a moment, watching her draw. There was something profoundly peaceful about the scene. The sound of the elevator interrupted the moment. A blonde woman came out, carrying cleaning supplies. She was young, maybe around 30s, with tired but beautiful features. She had the same blue eyes as Mia. She saw Richard standing near her daughter and turned pale. Mia, she said, approaching quickly. What are you doing? I was just sitting, Mommy. I just talked a little. He's very nice. The woman looked at Richard with a mixture of fear and recognition. Her eyes widened as she realized who he was. Mr. Sterling, I'm so sorry for my daughter's intrusion. I know she shouldn't be bothering you. Richard was surprised by the desperation in her voice. It was no bother at all, he said. What's your name? Deborah Davis, sir. I've been on the night cleaning crew for 3 months. Deborah, your daughter didn't bother me. In fact, she... Richard hesitated. How could he explain that this child had saved his life? She is very polite. Even so, I deeply apologize. I had no one to leave her with tonight, but I promise it won't happen again. Richard watched Deborah. She was clearly embarrassed, wringing a cloth in her nervous hands. Mia, on the other hand, seemed not to understand why her mother was so nervous. You don't need to apologize, Richard said. Actually, I wanted to thank Mia for something she did yesterday. Thank her. Deborah frowned, confused. She helped me with a very serious situation. I'd like to repay her. Richard took his wallet from his pocket and pulled out several large bills. Take this, for Mia, to buy whatever you need. Deborah looked at the money, then at him. Richard could see the need in her eyes, the hesitation of someone who truly needed that help. For a moment, he thought she would accept, but then she shook her head firmly. Thank you, Mr. Sterling, but I can't accept this. Why not? He asked, genuinely confused. Because my daughter just did what was right. We don't expect payment for doing the right thing. Richard was completely stunned. It was the first time in years that someone had refused his money. In his world, everything had a price. Everyone had a value for which they sold themselves. But we do need things, yes, Deborah interrupted with dignity. But not like this. I work for everything my daughter and I have. It may not be much, but it's ours. Mia, Deborah called to her daughter, get your drawings. Let's go home. The girl obeyed, carefully gathering the papers. Bye, she said to Richard, waving her small hand. Thanks for the sandwich. Bye, Mia. It was a pleasure talking with you." Richard stood in the empty lobby, watching the mother and daughter walk away. Deborah walked with dignity, even while carrying her cleaning supplies. Mia held her mother's hand, talking excitedly about the snack. He put the refused money away, still processing what had happened. A cleaning lady had refused an amount that probably represented 2 months of her salary. A 5-year-old child had treated him like an equal, without fear, and he, the man who controlled a financial empire, had spent the most genuine moments of the last few years talking about drawings and coloring books. Richard remained there for a few more minutes, looking at the spot where Mia had been sitting. There was a small colored pencil mark on the expensive leather sofa. Instead of getting angry, he smiled. For the first time in decades, a crack had opened in the billionaire's hardened heart. And it had been made by a 5-year-old girl who drew houses with gardens and believed that doing the right thing didn't deserve a reward. When Richard finally left the building, he wasn't thinking about contracts or investments. He was thinking about Mia, her simple drawings, and how a snack in an empty cafeteria had been more meaningful than any business dinner he'd ever had. And for the first time in a long time, he wondered if there was more to life than money and power. The following Monday, Richard Sterling arrived at the office with his mind still restless. The weekend had passed slowly, filled with work meetings and empty social dinners, but amidst it all, his mind constantly returned to the conversation with Mia in the cafeteria. It was 7 p.m. when he went down to the lobby. He knew Deborah worked the night shift, and part of him hoped to find the girl there again. He wouldn't admit it even to himself, but he had purposely altered his routine, leaving the office later. And there she was. Mia was sitting on the same corner sofa, focused on her drawings. This time, she was using papers that had clearly been taken from the trash. Report sheets with one blank side, used envelopes, anything that could serve as a canvas for her art. Richard approached silently. The girl was so absorbed in her drawing that she didn't notice his presence. She was holding a very small yellow-colored pencil, almost a stub, carefully coloring what looked like a sun. "Hi, Mia," he said softly. She looked up and her face lit up with a genuine smile. "Hi, you came back." "Yes, I work here, remember?" Richard smiled, sitting on the sofa next to her. "What are you drawing today?" "A garden," she answered, showing him the crumpled paper. "But I only have 3 colors. The yellow one ran out." Richard looked at the small collection of colored pencils beside her. There really were only 3, a worn blue one, a red one with no point, and the yellow stub she was holding. "So where did you get these papers?" "I found them in that trash can." She pointed to a nearby bin. "My mum taught me not to waste. If one side is clean, you can draw on it." Something tightened in Richard's chest. A 5-year-old child looking for paper in the trash so she could draw. "Mia, you really love to draw, don't you?" "A lot." Her eyes sparkled. "It's my favorite thing in the whole world. When I draw, I can make anything I want. Big houses, gardens, dogs. And what if you had new paper and more colored pencils? That would be the best." She sighed. "But they're expensive. My mum already has a lot of bills to pay." Richard fell silent for a moment, watching Mia return to her drawing. Her concentration was impressive. Even with poor materials, she created with a passion he didn't see in any of his executives. "I have to go now," he said, standing up. "But it was good to see you, Mia. Will you be back tomorrow?" "Maybe." She waved cheerfully as he walked away. Richard left the building, but he couldn't get the image of the girl drawing on trash paper out of his head. The next morning, before heading to the office, Richard made a stop he hadn't made in decades, a stationery store. He walked through the aisles filled with school supplies, feeling strangely out of place. He bought 3 drawing pads with quality paper, a large box of colored pencils with 48 different colors, some markers, and even a small pencil case to keep everything in. He asked for it to be wrapped in a nice bag. Throughout the day, the bag remained hidden behind his desk. Richard tried to focus on work, but his eyes kept returning to the package. He was nervous. Why was he nervous? It was just a gift for a child. At 7:15 p.m., he went down to the lobby again. Mia was there, as he expected, this time drawing on a sheet of brown paper that looked like it had come from a delivery package. "Hi, Richard," she said, using his name as if they were old friends. "Hi, Mia. I have something for you." He handed her the bag. Mia's eyes widened. "For me, really? Open it and see." With fingers trembling with excitement, Mia opened the bag. When she saw the drawing pads and the box of colored pencils, she was speechless. She picked up the box carefully, as if it were made of crystal. 48 colors, she whispered, reading the package. "I didn't even know so many colors existed." The smile that spread across her face was so radiant that Richard felt something move in his chest. It was pure joy, without calculations or ulterior motives. When was the last time he had seen someone so genuinely happy? Thank you. Mia jumped off the sofa and, without thinking, hugged his legs. Richard stood still for a second. He wasn't used to physical contact, especially from children, but after a moment, he gently placed his hand on her blonde head. "You're welcome, Mia." She pulled away and immediately began to open one of the pads and the box of pencils. "Can I draw something for you?" "Of course." Richard sat down and watched Mia work. This time, with clean paper and vibrant colors, she created something completely different. She chose a bright green for the grass, a perfect blue for the sky, and used at least 10 different colors to make a flower garden. "This is for you," she said, carefully tearing out the sheet and handing it to him. Richard took the drawing. It was the same house as always, but this time there were more details. Colorful flowers, a leafy tree, even some clouds in the sky. And at the door of the house, 2 figures, one small and one large. "That's us," Mia explained, pointing to the figures. "You and me in my dream house." Richard looked at the drawing and felt something he hadn't experienced in years. It was stronger than any emotion he'd felt signing multi-million-dollar contracts. Was it gratitude? Affection? He couldn't name it. "It's beautiful, Mia. Thank you." "Do you really like it?" "I like it more than anything I've ever received." Over the next few weeks, this became a routine. Richard always passed through the lobby around 7 p.m. and Mia was always there. Deborah never had problems with a babysitter again. It seemed the situation had stabilized this way. Mia began to wait for him. When the elevator opened and Richard stepped out, she was already on her feet, holding a new drawing to show him. Their conversations became longer and, surprisingly for Richard, deeper. "Why do you wear a suit every day?" she asked one Thursday. "Yeah, because I work in an office. It's what businessmen wear. But it doesn't look comfortable. My mum wears comfortable clothes to work. It's different." "Why?" Richard paused. "How do you explain social hierarchy to a 5-year-old? It's complicated." "Grown-ups always say things are complicated," Mia observed, coloring a purple butterfly. "But to me it seems simple. If it's uncomfortable, why wear it?" On another occasion she asked, "Do you have a family?" "No, none, not a mom, not a dad, not anymore." "That must be lonely." The simplicity of the observation hit him like a punch. It was lonely. He had spent so much time building walls around himself that he had forgotten what it was like to have genuine connections. But it was on a Tuesday that Mia asked the question that unsettled him the most. They were talking about her drawings when she suddenly stopped and looked at him with those piercing blue eyes. Why do you never really smile?" Richard blinked, caught off guard. "What do you mean?" "You smile, but it's not a real smile. It's like—" She paused, searching for words. "Like it's only with your mouth, not with your eyes." Richard was speechless. A 5-year-old child had identified something that probably no adult in his life had ever noticed. I don't know what you mean. When I make a pretty drawing, I smile like this," she demonstrated, her whole face lighting up. "When you smile, only your mouth moves. Why?" Richard looked at her, trying to form an answer. How could he explain that he had forgotten how to smile genuinely? That he had spent so many years using smiles as negotiation tools, that he had lost the ability to feel real joy? "I don't know," he finally admitted. "You don't have reasons to really smile." The question was innocent, but it cut deep. Richard thought about his life, the money, the power, the success, and he realized that none of it made him genuinely happy. Maybe I've forgotten how Holcomb," he said, more to himself than to her. "Want me to teach you? How would you teach me to smile?" "It's easy. You think of something that makes you really happy, like ice cream, or puppies, or when your mum gives you a big hug." Richard tried to think of something that made him genuinely happy. It was strange how difficult it was. But then he looked at Mia, with her golden hair and bright eyes, holding a colored pencil and waiting patiently. And for the first time in a long time, Richard Sterling smiled. A real smile. One that started in his eyes and spread across his entire face. "Like that," Mia clapped. "That was a real smile." "How did you know?" "Because your eyes sparkled. Just like mine when I get a present." Richard kept the drawing she had made for him that day. At home, he put it on the refrigerator, something he had never done with any important document. As he looked at the drawing before bed, Richard realized that this girl was affecting him in a way he couldn't fully understand. The drawing on the fridge, two simple figures in a colorful house, moved him more than any multi-million-dollar contract he had ever signed. Richard Sterling was changing, and a 5-year-old girl was responsible for it. Richard Sterling arrived at the office that Thursday with a different kind of determination. The last few days talking with Mia had, strangely, cleared his mind. The girl's innocence made him feel more focused, more present. And now he needed to use that mental clarity to find out who had tried to kill him. The police investigation was moving slowly. Detective Morrison called every couple of days with updates that basically said the same thing. They were still analyzing evidence and checking fingerprints, reviewing security footage. But Richard knew the answer wouldn't come from the outside. It would come from within his own company. He locked his office door and instructed Mrs. Patterson not to accept any calls or visitors. He needed absolute silence to concentrate. He began by spreading all the financial reports from the last 6 months across the huge mahogany desk. Balance sheets, income statements, audit reports, expense spreadsheets. It was a mountain of paper representing millions of dollars in transactions. Richard had built his empire by being meticulous with numbers. Every cent that entered or left the company passed through his direct or indirect approval. He knew the patterns, the normal fluctuations, the usual expenses. If there was something wrong, he would find it. He started with the administrative expense reports. Everything seemed normal. Rent, electricity, phone, insurance. The amounts matched previous months, and variations were within expectations. He then moved on to personnel costs, salaries, benefits, payroll taxes. Again, nothing out of the ordinary. Employees were paid on time, taxes were up to date, there was nothing suspicious. Richard picked up the vendor reports. Here, things got more complex. Hundreds of companies provided services to the Sterling Corporation, from large technology suppliers to small maintenance firms. Each transaction was authorized by different departments. He began to check the amounts month by month, January, February, or March, everything within the norm. April showed a slight increase in building maintenance costs, but that was common for the season. May, Richard stopped. There was something strange in the May numbers. The expenses for specialized services had doubled compared to the previous month. He took the detailed spreadsheet and began to analyze it item by item. Most were known expenses, legal consulting, external auditing, IT services, but there were 3 transactions he couldn't immediately identify, all approved by the finance department, all with significant amounts, $15,000 as, $20,000 as, and $30,000. The descriptions were vague: a specialized consulting, meta-technical services, strategic advisory. Richard picked up the internal phone and called the chief financial officer. "Marcus, I need you to come to my office, now." "Of course, Richard. Is there a problem?" "Just come." Marcus Davidson arrived in 5 minutes. He was a man of 45, Ashchin, with brown hair starting to go grey, always in an impeccable suit. He had been with the company for 15 years and was considered one of Richard's most trusted executives. "What can I do for you?" Marcus asked, sitting in the chair across the desk. Richard turned the spreadsheet towards him. "Explain these 3 transactions from May." Marcus adjusted his glasses and analyzed the numbers. "Ah, Yes, specialized consulting. We hired a few firms to do market analysis and investment advisory. Which firms? Let me check. Marcus took out his phone and started scrolling through emails. Here it is. Tech Consult Solutions, Strategic Advisory Partners, and Market Intelligence Group. Richard wrote down the names. What kind of service did these companies provide, exactly? Feasibility analyses for some projects we're considering. Market studies for international expansion. You know, the usual. And you have the reports they produced. Marcus hesitated for a fraction of a second. It was almost imperceptible, but Richard noticed. Of course. They're filed in the finance department. I can get you copies if you'd like. I want them. By the end of the day, no problem. After Marcus left, Richard picked up the phone and called the purchasing department directly. Sarah, Richard Sterling, I need you to check on 3 companies for me. Tech Consult Solutions, Strategic Advisory Partners, and Market Intelligence Group. I want to know everything about them. Addresses, registrations, transaction history with us. Of course, Mr. Sterling, how much time do I have? Until 5 this afternoon. Richard returned to the reports. Now he was specifically looking for other strange patterns. Expenses that didn't make sense, amounts that seemed inflated, transactions with unknown companies. In June, he found 2 more suspicious transactions. In July, another 3, always large amounts, always with vague descriptions, always approved by the finance department. At 4:30 p.m., Sarah from the purchasing department called, Mr. Sterling, I have information on those companies. Go ahead. It's strange, sir. Tech Consult Solutions is registered to a small commercial office downtown. It has no website, no registered employees other than the owner. Strategic Advisory Partners doesn't even exist anymore. Its registration was cancelled last month. And Market Intelligence Group, well, the address they provided is a parking lot. Richard felt his blood run cold. Are you sure? Absolutely, sir. I went to check the addresses myself. These companies are basically ghosts. Thank you, Sarah. Don't mention this to anyone for now. Richard hung up and stared at the reports scattered on his desk. Shell companies receiving tens of thousands of dollars, money leaving the Sterling Corporation and disappearing without a trace. Someone was embezzling funds from the company. Someone with access to the finance department. Someone who could create fake transactions and approve them without raising suspicion. At 5 p.m., Marcus returned with a folder. Here are the reports you asked for. Richard opened the folder. There were 3 documents, each about 10 pages long. At first glance, they looked like professional reports, graphs, analyses, recommendations. But as he began to read closely, he realized they were far too generic. Information anyone could find on the internet, superficial analyses, vague recommendations. Marcus, who made the initial contact with these companies? I did. We received proposals by email and I thought they were worth hiring. Do you have those original emails? Of course. They should be on my computer. Want me to print them? Yes. And Marcus, these reports don't seem worth the money we paid for them. Marcus shrugged. Sometimes it's like that with consulting. The result isn't always what we expect. When Marcus left again, Richard continued analyzing the numbers. With every spreadsheet he reviewed, he found more suspicious transactions, always following the same pattern: small or non-existent companies, large amounts, quick approvals from the finance department. In 3 months, over $200,000 had left the company for these consultancies. It was a significant amount, but not enough to compromise the overall budget. Exactly the kind of embezzlement that could go unnoticed for a long time. Richard took a calculator and began to add up all the suspicious amounts. The total surprised him, nearly $500,000 in 6 months. $500,000 disappearing bit by bit, in transactions small enough not to attract attention, but large enough to make someone rich quickly. He leaned back in his chair and looked out the window. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange. In a few hours, he would go down to meet Mia in the lobby. The girl who had saved his life, who made him genuinely smile, who was changing him without even knowing it. and now he had discovered that someone within his own company was not only stealing from him, but had also tried to kill him. Richard picked up the phone and called Detective Morrison. "Detective, Richard Sterling. I need to schedule an urgent meeting. I've found evidence that the attempt on my life is linked to an embezzlement scheme within the company." "What kind of evidence?" "Suspicious financial transactions. Shell companies. Someone has been stealing from the company for months, and I suspect they tried to kill me when they realized I might find the clues. Can we meet tomorrow morning? 8 o'clock sharp." "And detective, the person responsible has direct access to the finance department. The investigation needs to be discreet." Richard hung up and looked again at the reports scattered on his desk. The pattern was clear now. The embezzlement was real, systematic, and came from within the company. Someone very close to him was not only a thief, but also a potential murderer. And Richard Sterling was determined to find out who it was. Richard Sterling went down to the lobby that Friday with a heavy mind. He had spent the entire night analyzing the financial reports, connecting the dots between the shell companies and the embezzled money. The meeting with Detective Morrison was scheduled for the next day, but he still needed more concrete evidence. It was 7:15 p.m. when he reached the ground floor. As always, Mia was on the corner sofa, this time drawing with the new colored pencils he had given her. When she saw him, her face lit up with that genuine smile that always managed to lift the weight of Richard's problems. "Hi, Richard," she waved enthusiastically. "Look what I drew today." She held up a colorful drawing of a house with a huge garden. This time there were more details, flowers of various colors, a leafy tree with a swing, even a small pond with ducks. "It's beautiful, Mia," Richard said, sitting next to her. "Your drawings get better every day." "It's because now I have enough colors to make everything I imagine," she replied, picking up a green pencil to color more grass. "Before, I had to choose between making the sky blue or the flowers blue. Now I can do both." Richard smiled, but his smile wasn't as genuine as it used to be. Mia noticed immediately. "You're sad today," she observed, stopping her drawing to look at him. "Your eyes look different." "I'm a little worried about some things at work," he admitted. "What kind of things?" Richard hesitated. How do you explain to a 5-year-old that someone was trying to kill him and stealing from his company? "Someone did something bad at the company, and I'm trying to find out who it was. Like the man who messed with your car." Richard looked at her more closely. "Do you still remember that day?" "Of course I do. It was when you almost got in the dangerous car. I was so scared." "Mia, can you tell me exactly what you saw that day?" "Every detail you can remember." Mia put her colored pencil aside and frowned, concentrating. "Well, I was coming down the stairs with my mom, but she forgot something upstairs, so she told me to wait and went to get it. I stood by the stairwell door. And that's when you saw the man. Yes, he was crouching next to your car. The shiny black car. Could you see his face?" Mia shook her head. "Not very well. His back was to me and I was far away, but I saw he was wearing a grey suit." Richard nodded. This matched what she had told him before. "Anything else? Any detail? No matter how small?" Mia thought for a moment, biting her lower lip as she did when she concentrated hard. "He had a small briefcase, and..." She paused and as if trying to remember something important. "And what, Mia?" "On the day I screamed, I saw a man near your car. He was wearing a big watch with a leather strap." Richard felt his blood run cold. "A watch? Are you sure?" "I'm sure. It was really big and it shone when he moved his arm. The strap was brown, like leather." "How could you see the watch if his back was to you?" "Because he raised his arm to get something from the briefcase. That's when I saw it. The watch was very flashy." Richard tried to keep his voice calm, but his heart was racing. "Could you describe the watch any better, the shape, the color?" "It was round and gold, and really big. Bigger than normal watches. The strap was dark brown, and it had what do you call them? Little holes in the strap." Richard closed his eyes for a moment. He knew only one person who wore a watch exactly matching that description. A gold Rolex Daytona with a perforated brown leather strap. It was an expensive, distinctive model that very few people owned. And he knew exactly who wore that watch every single day. Mia, are you absolutely sure about what you saw? Yes, I am. Why? Is it important? Richard looked at the girl, with her innocent blue eyes and her genuine concern. She had no idea of the bomb she had just dropped on his life. Yes, Mia, it's very important. Thank you for telling me. You're welcome. I hope this helps you find out who did the bad thing. Richard spent a few more minutes talking with Mia about her drawings, but his mind was elsewhere. The watch. He had known that watch for over 15 years. He had even joked a few times about how flashy and expensive it was. It was Marcus Davidson's watch, his chief financial officer, his long-time friend, the man he trusted most in the company. When he said goodbye to Mia and went home, Richard couldn't think of anything else. Marcus, the man he had personally hired 15 years ago, the executive who knew all the company's financial secrets, the friend who had dinner at his house on weekends. At home, Richard went straight to his private office and turned on his computer. He began to review all the emails exchanged with Marcus over the past few months, looking for any clue he might have missed. He found several messages about the specialized consultancies. Marcus always presented the proposals as unmissable opportunities, necessary investments for the company's growth, and Richard, blindly trusting his friend, approved without question. He picked up the phone and called a private investigator he had used on other occasions. Peterson, Richard Sterling. I need an urgent and discreet investigation into Marcus Davidson. I want to know everything. Where he's spending money, what properties he owns, bank movements, everything. How much time do I have? Until Monday morning. Richard spent the weekend trying to keep busy, but he couldn't stop thinking about the betrayal. Marcus wasn't just an employee, he was his friend. They had built the company together, weathered crises together, celebrated successes together. How could someone he trusted so much do something like this? On Sunday, Peterson called. Mr. Sterling, I have information on Marcus Davidson. Go ahead. He bought a $500,000 house last month, paid in cash. He also acquired a luxury car and has been making regular deposits into an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. Richard felt his stomach turn. How much money is in that account? From what I could trace, about $400,000. And sir, there's more. Continue. He has a plane ticket purchased for the Cayman Islands next week. A one-way ticket. Richard hung up the phone and stared out the window. $400,000. Almost exactly the amount that had been embezzled from the company through the shell companies. Marcus was planning to flee, taking the stolen money and leaving Richard behind, but before that he had tried to kill him. Why? Maybe because he realized Richard was starting to ask questions. Maybe because he wanted the whole company for himself. Or maybe because 15 years of friendship meant nothing compared to greed. On Monday morning, Richard arrived at the office with the evidence organized. Financial reports, proof of the shell companies, the investigator's report on Marcus's assets, and now the description of the watch from Mia. At 9 a.m., Marcus entered the office as he always did every morning. He greeted Richard with a friendly smile, talked about the weekend, commented on some reports that needed to be reviewed. Richard glanced at the watch on his friend's wrist, a gold Rolex Daytona, perforated brown leather strap, exactly as Mia had described. Marcus, I need to talk to you about something important, Richard said. Of course. What about? Richard looked into the eyes of the man he had considered a brother. There was no guilt there, no nervousness. Marcus was playing the role of the loyal friend perfectly. About the consulting firms you hired over the last few months. An almost imperceptible flash passed through Marcus's eyes. It lasted only a fraction of a second, but Richard saw it. What about them? I found out they are shell companies. The money we paid them has simply vanished. Marcus frowned, feigning surprise. What do you mean, shell companies? Fake addresses, cancelled registrations, non-existent owners. Someone created these companies to embezzle money from our company. That's terrible. Do you think we were scammed by con artists? The performance was convincing. If Richard didn't know the truth, he would have certainly believed his friend's indignation. Over $400,000, Marcus, in 6 months. My God, we need to call the police immediately. I already have. In fact, they're coming here this afternoon to investigate. This time, Marcus couldn't completely hide his reaction. His eyes narrowed for an instant before returning to his worried expression. Excellent. I'll gather all the documents related to these companies to help with the investigation. No need. I already have everything they'll need. Richard opened his desk drawer and took out a thick folder. Financial reports, payment receipts, email communications, and also a report from a private investigator about suspicious bank movements. Marcus's face turned slightly pale. A private investigator? Yes. He traced the money to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. Interesting, isn't it? The same amount that disappeared from our company is deposited in an account that belongs to... Well, you can imagine. Marcus remained silent for a long moment. Richard could see his friend's mind working, calculating options, looking for a way out. Richard, Marcus said finally, his voice losing its feigned concern. You don't understand the situation. Then explain it to me. This company. We built it together. But who always gets the credit? Who is always called the business genius? You, always you. Richard felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. After 15 years of friendship and partnership, Marcus was revealing a resentment Richard had never noticed. I work just as hard as you, Marcus continued, the mask finally falling. I make decisions just as important as yours. But everyone only knows Richard Sterling. No one talks about Marcus Davidson. Marcus, the company has my name because I founded it. You joined later. I joined later, but I turned this company into what it is today. Half of the decisions that made you rich were mine, but you get all the credit. And that justifies stealing. Justifies trying to kill me, Marcus laughed bitterly. Trying to kill you? What are you talking about? Richard took another document from the folder. Sabotage of the brakes on my car, and a witness saw a man with a distinctive watch near my car on the day of the sabotage. Richard pointed to Marcus's wrist. A watch exactly like yours. Marcus looked at his own wrist, then back at Richard. For the first time, he looked genuinely scared. Richard, I didn't try to kill you. I swear I didn't. Then explain why a witness saw someone with your watch sabotaging my car. Marcus hesitated, clearly struggling with some internal decision. All right. So I was in the parking garage that day, but not to sabotage your car. Then what for? To install a tracking device. Richard frowned. A tracker? Why? Because I wanted to know your schedules, your routes. To avoid you, I was planning to take some important documents from the office without you knowing. The betrayal deepened with every word. What documents? Contracts, partnership agreements, things I could use to start my own business after I fled with the money. Richard felt a mixture of anger and sadness. Marcus had planned not only to steal from him, but also to use confidential information to compete against him. Marcus, Richard said, his voice heavy with disappointment, 15 years of friendship. 15 years working together, building all of this, and you throw it all away for jealousy. Marcus lowered his head. Jealousy consumed me, Richard. Seeing you always be the center of attention, always the genius, always the leader. I started to feel I deserved more. You always had recognition. You were always well paid. You were always respected, but always in your shadow. Richard looked at the man who had been his closest friend for 15 years. The betrayal hurt more than any assassination attempt. He could recover money. Trust, never. Marcus, our friendship is over. You will return every cent you stole, and then you will leave. Forever. Marcus nodded, tears in his eyes. I understand. And Richard, I'm sorry. For the 15 years we threw away. For the trust I broke. For everything. Your regret changes nothing. I know. Richard looked out the window, feeling the weight of the betrayal. Marcus had revealed his true colors, but some questions still remained unanswered. If Marcus hadn't sabotaged the brakes, then who did? And why? The only certainty Richard had was that he could trust very few people, perhaps only a 5-year-old girl who draws houses with gardens, and who had saved his life with a desperate scream. The embezzlement was real and came from within the company. But the mystery of the true would-be assassin was still far from being solved. Richard Sterling spent the next 2 days reviewing all the documents and evidence he had collected. The private investigator had confirmed Marcus's suspicious bank movements, and the police were already preparing the legal procedures to recover the embezzled money. But there was one conversation Richard needed to have before all of this became public. On Thursday morning, he arrived at the office earlier than usual. He asked Mrs. Patterson to cancel all his appointments for the day and not to accept any calls or visitors. Then he sent a message to Marcus. "I need to speak with you in my office. 10 a.m. Come alone." Richard knew this would probably be the last conversation he would ever have with the man he considered his best friend for 15 years. He wanted it to be private, away from curious ears and speculative glances. At 10 a.m. sharp, Marcus knocked on the door. "Come in," Richard said, without looking up from the papers on his desk. Marcus entered and closed the door behind him. He was visibly nervous but tried to maintain his composure. He wore the same impeccable suit as always, but Richard noticed his hands were trembling slightly. "Sit down." Richard indicated the armchair in front of the desk. Marcus sat, crossed his legs, and attempted a forced smile. "Richard, about our conversation on Monday. I was thinking maybe we could find a solution to this whole situation." Richard finally looked up and stared directly at Marcus. "A solution? What kind of solution do you have in mind?" "Well, I could return the money. All of it. And maybe we could forget this ever happened. After all, we've been partners for so long." "Marcus," Richard interrupted, his voice calm but firm, "you stole $400,000 from our company. You created shell companies. You lied to me for months, and now you want me to just forget it happened." Marcus leaned forward, desperation beginning to show in his voice. "Richard, please. Think of everything we've built together. Think of the friendship we have. One mistake can't destroy 15 years of partnership." "One mistake?" Richard stood up from his chair, his voice rising. "Marcus, this wasn't a mistake. It was a calculated and premeditated betrayal. You planned this for months. I know I went too far, but too far." Richard walked around the desk and stood next to Marcus. "You didn't go too far. You betrayed me in the worst possible way. You broke my trust, stole my money, and planned to flee the country with it all." Marcus stood up too, now clearly agitated. "All right, Richard, I admit it. I did all of it. But do you want to know why?" "Yes, I do." Marcus walked to the window, looking out at the city below. "Because I was tired of living in your shadow." "In my shadow?" Marcus turned abruptly to face Richard. 15 years, Richard. 15 years working by your side, making important decisions, closing deals, building this company. And what do I have to show for it? You have an excellent salary, profit-sharing, recognition. Recognition? Marcus laughed bitterly. What recognition? Everyone knows Richard Sterling, the business genius. Nobody knows who Marcus Davidson is. Richard frowned. Marcus, you have always been recognized. Your work has always been valued. By you, maybe. But what about the rest of the world? How many times did you appear alone in business magazines? How many times did you give interviews talking as if you built everything yourself? I never said I built everything myself, but you never mentioned my contribution either, did you? Richard paused for a moment. Marcus was partly right. He had indeed gotten used to being the face of the company, the spokesman, the one who received public credit. Marcus, if this bothered you so much, why did you never talk to me about it? I did, Marcus exploded. Several times I suggested we do presentations together, that we appear in the media together. And you always said it was better to have a single voice representing the company. Richard vaguely remembered these conversations, but at the time he had considered it a purely practical marketing issue. You're right, I should have included you more, but that doesn't justify theft, Marcus. Yes, it does, Marcus said, all pretense of remorse finally gone. I deserved half the recognition, half the fame, half of everything, but since that was never going to happen, I decided to take what was mine by right. Richard looked at Marcus with a mixture of disbelief and sadness. What was yours by right? Marcus, you were my employee. A very well-paid and respected employee, but still an employee. Employee? Marcus laughed with disdain. I was your de facto partner, even if not on paper. Half of the ideas that made this company grow were mine. And you were compensated for those ideas. Compensated, Richard? You're worth $50 million. I'm worth $2 million. Do you think that's fair? Richard was silent for a moment. He had never thought about the wealth disparity between them in those terms. Marcus, you knew the terms when you started working here. We never hid the fact that I was the owner of the company, but I never imagined you would be so selfish with success. Selfish? I gave you opportunities you would never have had anywhere else. I treated you like family. Family? Marcus scoffed. You treated me like a competent employee, nothing more. That's not true. How many times did you have dinner at my house? How many times did we talk about our personal lives? How many times did I ask for your opinion on important decisions? And how many times did you actually follow my opinion when it was different from yours? Richard stopped to think. Marcus was right again. He always listened to his friends' opinions, but in the end, he made the decisions alone. Marcus, I founded this company. It's natural that I have the final say. Natural for you, maybe, but humiliating for me. So why did you never leave? Why didn't you ever start your own company? Marcus gave a dry laugh. With what money? With what connections? Do you think that after working for Richard Sterling for 15 years, anyone would take me seriously as an independent businessman? You could have tried. I could have, but it was easier to take what was already mine. Richard shook his head. It wasn't yours, Marcus. It never was. Yes, it was. Marcus slammed his fist on the desk. Every major decision in the last 10 years went through me. Every strategy, every investment, every acquisition. I was there. Richard, I was always there, and you were paid to be there. Not enough. It was never enough. Richard looked at Marcus and saw a man he had never truly known. 15 years of friendship, and he had never noticed the resentment growing inside his partner. Marcus, do you have any idea what you've done to me? The trust you've broken? The same thing you did to me for 15 years. You ignored me, diminished me, always kept me in the background. I never did that intentionally. Intentionally or not, it's what happened. Richard walked back to his chair and sat down heavily. So, this is how you really feel, after all these years. This is how I've always felt, Richard. The difference is that now I don't have to pretend anymore. And you don't feel a shred of regret for what you did. Marcus thought for a moment before answering. I regret getting caught. I regret not taking more money, but regret taking what was mine. No. Richard felt as if he had been slapped in the face. He had hoped Marcus would show at least some remorse, some acknowledgement that he had been wrong. But there he was, without any real regret. Marcus, you understand that our friendship is over, don't you? Our friendship ended a long time ago, Richard. You just didn't notice. When? When you decided that Richard Sterling was more important than Marcus Davidson. When you chose to be a business celebrity instead of a real partner. Richard fell silent for a long moment, processing everything he had just heard. You're fired, he said finally. I figured. And I'm going to press criminal charges. You will return every cent, and you will still go to jail. I figured that too, and I never want to see you again. Marcus walked towards the door, but stopped before leaving. Richard. What? You really don't get it, do you? You can't see that a part of this is your fault too. The only fault I have is trusting you. Marcus shook his head. No. Your fault was never seeing me as an equal. It was treating me like a talented employee instead of a real partner. You were an employee, Marcus, not a partner. And it was exactly that attitude that brought us here. Marcus opened the door and left, closing it behind him hard enough to make the pictures on the wall shake. Richard was left alone in the office, feeling the weight of the conversation. 15 years of friendship had completely disintegrated. There was nothing left to salvage, no bridge to rebuild. He picked up the phone and called the legal department. "Janet, Richard Sterling. I need you to prepare all the documents to fire Marcus Davidson for cause. And I also want you to contact the prosecutor's office. We're going to press criminal charges for embezzlement." "Understood, Mr. Sterling. Anything else?" "Yes. I want you to review all contracts and agreements Marcus had access to in the last 2 years. I need to know if he took any confidential information. I'll get on it immediately." Richard hung up and stared out the window. The city continued to function normally below. People coming and going, cars moving, life going on. But for him, something fundamental had changed. For the first time in 15 years, he was truly alone in the company. The man he trusted most had revealed himself as a traitor. The friendship he considered most solid had proven to be an illusion. Richard spent the rest of the day organizing the transition. He redistributed Marcus's responsibilities among other executives, changed passwords for important systems, and informed senior management of the CFO's departure due to strategic differences. At 7 p.m., as had become his routine, he went down to the lobby. He needed to see Mia. He needed that simple, honest conversation that only she could provide. But when he reached the ground floor, Mia wasn't alone. Deborah was sitting next to her daughter, helping her organize her drawings. "Hi, Richard," Mia waved cheerfully. "My mom came early today." Deborah stood up, clearly embarrassed to be found there. "Sorry, Mr. Sterling. I finished work early and came to get Mia." "No need to apologize, Deborah." "In fact," Richard hesitated for a moment. "Do you have time to talk for a bit?" Deborah seemed surprised. "Of course, if you'd like, sir." The three of them sat on the sofa. Mia continued to draw while Richard and Deborah talked. For the first time, he really paid attention to the woman who worked tirelessly to support her daughter. Deborah spoke about her 3 jobs, about the difficulties of raising a child alone, about the dreams she had for Mia's future. Her voice was soft, but there was an inner strength that impressed Richard. "Deborah, may I ask about Mia's father?" She hesitated for a moment. "He left us when Mia was 2. He said he wasn't ready to be a father." "That must have been difficult." "It was, but Mia gives me the strength to keep going. She's my everything." Richard looked at the girl, who was coloring a new drawing of a house with a garden. "She's a special child. She is very smart and affectionate, and sometimes I think she's more mature than I am. Deborah, have you ever thought about going back to school, getting a college degree?" "I think about it all the time, but I don't have the time or the money. I work at a clothing store in the morning, at a family's house in the afternoon, and here at night. When is there time?" Richard grew thoughtful. Here was an intelligent, hard-working woman, limited only by her circumstances. "What if I told you the company has a scholarship program for employees?" Deborah looked at him in surprise. "It does." "It can," Richard smiled. "Starting now." "Mr. Sterling, I can't accept charity." "It's not charity. It's an investment. More qualified employees are more valuable to the company." Mia stopped drawing and looked at them. "Mommy, are you going to study?" "Maybe, sweetie, if I can manage the time." "That's so cool. I want to study too. When do I go to school?" Richard looked at Deborah. "About that. Have you been able to enroll Mia yet? I'm still saving money for school supplies. And what if the company also had an educational assistance program for employees, children?" Deborah looked at him with teary eyes. "Mr. Sterling, why are you doing this?" Richard looked at Mia, who had gone back to drawing, then at Deborah. "Because you two taught me something very important." "What?" "That the most valuable things in life can't be bought." Richard spent another hour talking with the mother and daughter. For the first time in a long time, he felt genuinely relaxed. There was no hidden agenda, no ulterior motives, no power games, just simple, honest conversation. When they finally said their goodbyes, Richard went up to his office with a different feeling. He had lost a friend that day, but he had gained something more valuable, a new perspective on what truly mattered. Sitting alone in his office, Richard realized that the pain of Marcus's betrayal was beginning to give way to something unexpected: relief. Perhaps it was better to discover his friend's true nature now than to continue living a lie. And for the first time in 15 years, Richard Sterling began to imagine what his life would be like without carrying the weight of a false friendship on his shoulders. 3 months had passed since the confrontation with Marcus. Autumn painted the city in golden hues, and Richard Sterling watched the landscape from his office window with completely different eyes. They were no longer the eyes of a man who saw only numbers and profit opportunities. They were the eyes of someone who had learned to see people. On the desk in front of him was a document he had spent weeks drafting. A restructuring plan that would change not only the lives of Deborah and Mia, but the entire culture of the Sterling Corporation. "Mrs. Patterson," he called his secretary on the intercom, "could you ask Deborah Davis to come to my office? And please, tell her she can bring Mia if she likes." "Of course, Mr. Sterling." While he waited, Richard recalled the last few months. The investigation into Marcus had ended with him returning the stolen money and leaving town without a look back. But the departure of his former partner had opened up space for something new in Richard's life. His daily conversations with Mia in the lobby had expanded to include Deborah as well. Slowly, he had begun to truly know the woman behind the employee. A soft knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in." Deborah entered, accompanied by Mia, who was carrying her new drawing pad. The little girl ran to Richard with a radiant smile. "Hi, Richard. Look what I drew for you." She handed him a drawing of a large house with many windows and a colorful garden. This time, there were 3 figures at the door: a woman, a child, and a man in a suit. "It's beautiful. Mia, you get better at drawing every day." "It's because you gave me the good pencils," she replied, sitting on the sofa in the corner of the office. Richard turned to Deborah, who was visibly nervous. "Deborah, please sit down. I need to talk to you about something very important." She sat on the edge of the armchair, her hands clasped in her lap. "Did I do something wrong, Mr. Sterling?" "On the contrary, you've done everything right, and that's exactly why I'm here." Richard picked up the document from the desk. 3 months ago, you told me you'd like to go back to school but didn't have the time or resources. Remember?" "Yes, I remember." "Well, the Sterling Corporation is implementing a new professional development program for employees, and you've been selected to be the first participant." Deborah's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" "Starting next week, you will be promoted to administrative assistant in the Human Resources Department. Normal business hours, Monday to Friday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. A salary 3 times what you're currently making." Deborah was speechless for a moment. "Mr. Sterling, I don't have any office experience." "You will receive full training. And on Saturday mornings, the company will pay for your business administration degree at the university." Is this real?" "Completely real. You're intelligent, hard-working, and trustworthy. Those are exactly the qualities we're looking for." Tears began to stream down Deborah's face. "Mr. Sterling, I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to thank me. You deserve this opportunity." Richard turned to Mia, who had stopped drawing to pay attention to the conversation. "And as for you, young artist, I have news for you too." "For me?" Mia asked, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. "The company is creating an educational fund for employees, children. This means you will go to the best private school in the city, with everything paid for: tuition, uniform, supplies, lunch, everything." Mia jumped off the sofa and ran to hug Richard's legs. "Really? I'm going to a real school?" "Really? And when you grow up, if you want to go to college, that will be paid for too." Deborah stood up, still with tears in her eyes. "Mr. Sterling, this is too much. I can't accept such generosity." "Deborah," Richard interrupted gently, "can I tell you something?" "Of course. A few months ago, I almost died. Someone sabotaged my car, cut the brakes. If I had gotten into that car, I wouldn't be here today." Deborah frowned, not understanding where he was going with this. "But I didn't die. Do you know why? Because your daughter saved me. She yelled, she warned me of the danger. A 5-year-old girl had more courage and kindness than any adult in my life." Richard looked at Mia, who was drawing again. "She didn't just save my life, Deborah. She taught me how to truly live. She taught me that there are more important things than money. She taught me what genuine kindness is. And you, he continued, taught me about dignity, about working honestly for what you have, about raising a child with solid values even in the most difficult circumstances. Richard walked to the window. For years I lived surrounded by people who only approached me out of self-interest. Employees who were afraid, partners who wanted to use me, false friends who envied me. But you treated me like a human being from day one. Because you are a human being, Mia said, without looking up from her drawing, everyone is... Richard smiled. The simplicity of the girl's observation was profoundly touching. Exactly, Mia. Everyone is... I had just forgotten that. In the following weeks, Richard implemented a series of changes at the Sterling Corporation. He created wellness programs for employees, increased the salaries of the lowest paid positions, established an on-site daycare for employees, children, and began to regularly appear on the operational floors, talking with people who were previously invisible to him. The transformation did not go unnoticed by the business media. Specialized magazines began writing about Richard Sterling's new philosophy, but for him, it wasn't a marketing strategy. It was a real, profound change in how he saw the world. One afternoon, while walking through the company's hallways, he stopped to observe Deborah in her new role. She was explaining procedures to a new employee, speaking with patience and kindness. In 3 months, she had become one of the most respected employees in the department. Later, when he went down to the ground floor, he found Mia in the new children's space he had created. She was drawing with other children, the sons and daughters of employees who could now work with peace of mind. "Hi, Richard," she waved when she saw him. "Hi, Mia. How was school today?" "Great. I learned about primary colors. Did you know that all colors come from blue, red, and yellow?" "Yes, I did. And are you enjoying school?" "A lot. I have many friends now. And you know what else? My mum is very happy. She smiles all the time now." Richard looked out the window and saw Deborah passing down the hall. She really did look different, more confident, more radiant. "Mia," he said, "you two saved my life in ways you can't even imagine." "What do you mean?" "Before I met you, I only lived to work and make money. I had no real friends, no family, no joy. And now I understand that being rich isn't about having a lot of money. It's about having people who truly care about you. It's about making a difference in the lives of others." When he left the company that evening, Richard stopped at a toy store and bought a huge box of colored pencils, not because Mia needed them, but because he wanted to see her smile the next day. Months earlier, Richard Sterling was a billionaire who saw only figures. Now he was a man who saw people. He hadn't found a new family in the traditional sense, but he had found something equally valuable, a new way to live, less arrogant, more human. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next ones. Leave a like because it helps this story get recommended to more people. See you in the next story.